For 12 years, your entire universe was defined by the relentless, soul-crushing hum of fluorescent lights in a windowless municipal building in Austin, Texas. You were a mid-level forensic auditor for the Internal Revenue Service, armed with a master's degree in accounting that cost you $80,000, and a genius-level intellect that the federal government valued at a meager $65,000 a year. You spent your days buried under mountains of heavily redacted 1,040 tax forms, hunting down microscopic discrepancies in the capital gains manipulation of local car dealerships and mid-sized tech startups. Your life was an exercise in bureaucratic stagnation. You drove a failing sedan that violently shuddered every time it shifted into third gear. You ate cold leftovers from plastic containers. You watched your wife Claire quietly tally the grocery bill every Sunday, the silent mathematics of poverty etching premature lines around her eyes. She was your anchor to a normal life, but that normal life was slowly suffocating both of you, under the sheer, insurmountable weight of compounding interest and utility bills. The resentment did not arrive all at once. It seeped into your bones over a decade. It built up every time you audited a billionaire who utilized complex offshore trusts to legally evade millions in taxes, while you had to carefully calculate whether you could afford a new water heater. You understood the global financial system, the intricate dance of liquidity thresholds, wire transfer clearances, and corporate structuring, better than the titans of industry you were tasked with policing. Yet, you were the one trapped in a gray fabric cubicle, a highly calibrated instrument of mathematics, left to rust in a basement. The catalyst that fundamentally altered the trajectory of your existence was not born of violence, but of an insultingly amateurish financial equation. It was a Tuesday in late November. You were assigned a routine audit of a small, seemingly unremarkable chain of suburban laundromats and a scrap metal yard, located in the dusty, oil-choked outskirts of Odessa, Texas. The primary location, Sudsy's Laundromat, reported a daily revenue that defied the basic laws of retail economics. Sitting in your shuddering sedan in the cracked asphalt parking lot of Sudsy's, you watched the front doors for 6 hours. You counted the foot traffic. You measured the electrical draw of the industrial dryers against the local utility grid records. Then, you opened the corporate ledger on your battered laptop. The math was violently, hilariously wrong. The laundromat was inflating its daily cash receipts by 400%, utilizing rudimentary fake invoices to justify the massive influx of physical currency into their corporate accounts. It was a money laundering operation, and it was structured with the finesse of a sledgehammer. A lesser auditor would have immediately flagged the file and handed it over to the Drug Enforcement Administration. You did not. You sat in the suffocating heat of your car, the engine ticking as it cooled, and you ran the numbers. You traced the clumsy audit trail backward. You saw how the illicit inventory was converted into physical paper, how it was poorly smurfed into regional banks, and how it was ultimately routed through terribly exposed shell corporations. You realized, with absolute clinical certainty, that whoever was running this operation was losing roughly 30% of their total yield to sloppy offshore routing, unnecessary tax penalties, and sheer logistical incompetence. The logical pressure in your chest became absolute. It wasn't the allure of the criminal underworld that tempted you. It was the irresistible, borderline obsessive urge to optimize a broken system. They were bleeding cash, and you possessed the precise architectural knowledge to stop the hemorrhage. You utilized the dark web protocols you had learned from tracking cryptocurrency tax evaders to find a name. You didn't reach out to a cartel boss. You reached out to their logistics liaison, a man named Elias Vargas. You purchased a cracked $10 burner phone from a gas station, a piece of plastic that would soon become the most terrifying object in your life, and you made the call. The meeting took place in the desolate back office of the scrap metal yard, surrounded by rusting husks of abandoned vehicles. Elias Vargas wore a bespoke suit that cost more than your annual salary. He brought 2 silent men whose posture radiated a quiet, practiced lethality. But looking at Elias, you didn't see a threat. You saw a desperately inefficient chief financial officer. You opened your laptop and turned the screen toward him. You did not speak of narcotics, violence, or contraband. You spoke strictly in the sterilized language of corporate enterprise. You detailed their staggering overhead costs. You explained the vulnerabilities of their current proxy ownership structure, highlighting how easily a single retail bank compliance officer could trigger a federal red flag and collapse their entire network. You showed them how their current system of physical cash deposits was begging for a currency transaction report. Then, you offered the solution. You proposed a decentralized network of 45 low-level proxies, meticulously orchestrated to deposit exactly $8,500 across 14 different regional bank accounts over a staggered 9-day period to completely evade the algorithmic detection of the bank's compliance software. You proposed routing the sanitized funds through an anonymous Delaware LLC, tumbling the capital through decentralized cryptocurrency nodes, and finally resting it in an untouchable trust in Belize. You promised them a system with absolute plausible deniability. You promised to reduce their laundering losses from 30% to a microscopic margin of error. In return, you demanded a 5% consultation fee. Elias stared at the master Excel ledger glowing on your screen. The silence in the room was heavier than the West Texas heat. When he finally nodded, a profound, chilling shift occurred within your soul. You convinced yourself, in that very moment, that you were not becoming a criminal. You were simply transitioning into high-level enterprise risk management. You would never touch the product. You would never see the violence. You were merely bringing order to chaos, inserting capital back into the local economy, and treating the underworld as a logistical puzzle. Within 90 days, the first massive wire transfer clearance was executed perfectly. The funds settled in the offshore accounts without a single alarm tripping in the federal databases you yourself used to monitor. Your 5% fee for that first quarter equated to $4.2 million. The transition from the municipal worker to the underworld architect was swift and seamless. You resigned from the IRS, citing a lucrative opportunity at an independent consulting firm. You abandoned the failing sedan at a dealership, not even bothering to trade it in. You moved Claire from your cramped, water-damaged apartment into a pristine, climate-controlled penthouse in Brickell, Florida. You told her your new firm specialized in high-risk international asset management. She didn't ask too many questions. Not when the compounding debt vanished overnight, replaced by an aggressive, overwhelming influx of wealth. You bought a gleaming silver Rolex Submariner. An excessive piece of engineering that you wore on your left wrist as you typed? It was a tangible anchor to your new reality. For the first time in your life, the system wasn't exploiting your genius. You had successfully hacked the capitalist machine. You felt an intoxicating, dangerous illusion of control. You were untouchable, suspended above the filth and the blood, manipulating the world with clean, mathematical precision. But you had not yet realized that a flawless spreadsheet cannot sanitize the rot of the money it governs. For the first 2 years, the system you built was a masterpiece of decentralized logistics. You did not just survive in the underworld, you industrialized it. Sitting at the glass desk in your Brickell penthouse, 50 stories above the glittering Atlantic Ocean, you watched the master Excel ledger update with the rhythmic predictability of a metronome. You were washing $12 million a month. You quickly learned that the true nightmare of the cartel business was not rival syndicates or heavily armed raids. It was the sheer, unavoidable physical weight of the paper. $1 million in used $20 bills weighs exactly 110 pounds. Every 30 days, you were tasked with the logistical horror of managing 1,320 pounds of illicit inventory. You never saw the drugs, and you aggressively maintained your plausible deniability regarding how the cash was generated. To you, it was merely an accounting bottleneck. To solve it, you deployed your network of 45 proxies, your army of smurfs. Men like Mateo Ruiz, a desperate warehouse worker whose name you owned for a fraction of a percentage point. You structured the operation with algorithmic precision. Mateo and the others were instructed to never carry more than $9,000 at a time. They deposited exactly $8,500 into 14 different regional bank accounts over a staggered 9-day period. This kept every single transaction safely beneath the $10,000 federal reporting threshold, intentionally starving the currency transaction report algorithms of any actionable data. The physical cash was swallowed by the front businesses you legally purchased. Sudsy's laundromat in Odessa, a high-volume car wash in El Paso, and a sprawling scrap metal yard. You mathematically inflated the daily revenue of the car wash by 400%, generating thousands of microscopic fake receipts to justify the massive influx of physical cash into the corporate accounts. From there, the sanitized money was wire transferred from the Texan corporate accounts to an anonymous Delaware shell LLC. The Delaware entity would then funnel the capital through a series of decentralized cryptocurrency tumbling nodes, fracturing the audit trail into 10,000 digital pieces before the funds finally settled in a pristine, untouchable offshore trust in Belize. You walked into high-end financial institutions in downtown Miami, the heavy silver Rolex Submariner gleaming on your wrist, and the bank managers greeted you by name. They offered you espresso in bone china cups, completely unaware that the millions of dollars you were investing in commercial real estate arbitrage were soaked in blood. You had effectively made the cartel completely legitimate on paper. You were a master of the universe. But the fundamental flaw of any perfect machine is that it is eventually asked to operate beyond its engineering limits. The first fracture in the architecture did not come from a SWAT team kicking down your reinforced mahogany door. It came from a mid-level compliance officer named Sarah Jenkins at a regional bank branch in Texas. She noticed that Mateo Ruiz was consistently depositing $8,500 in cash every second Tuesday. Sarah Jenkins flagged the account for a routine internal review. When the alert hit your encrypted ledger, the temperature in your penthouse seemed to drop 10 degrees. The fatal escalation arrived on a humid Thursday evening. The cracked $10 burner phone vibrated violently against the glass surface of your desk. Elias coldly informed you that $30 million in physical cash had been dumped into a climate-controlled storage unit in Hialeah. He demanded it be completely cleaned and routed to the Belize Trust in 30 days. You stared at the burner phone, your heart rate instantly spiking to 160 beats per minute. You could not inject $30 million of physical paper into your existing front businesses in 30 days. You stopped sleeping. The dark circles under your eyes deepened into bruised hollows. The industrial cash-counting machine you kept in the spare bedroom became an instrument of psychological torture. And then, the final, devastating piece of the trap clicked into place. The digital signature on the audit file belonged to Special Agent Marcus Vance. The collapse of a multi-million-dollar financial empire does not occur with the cinematic explosion of a car bomb. It occurs in absolute, terrifying silence. A newly recruited proxy handed a teller exactly $10,500 in banded 20s. That single lazy mistake breached the $10,000 federal reporting threshold. Instead of the familiar green confirmation, the bank account screen returned a stark, red line of text. Funds frozen. You stood up, your knees buckling slightly under the sudden, crushing weight of reality. You quietly packed a single canvas duffel bag. You did not pack the bespoke suits. You walked out of the climate-controlled high-rise. You did not look back. 3 years later, the brilliant mind is rotting in a rusted, corrugated tin shack on the outskirts of San Jose, Costa Rica. You hacked the capitalist machine, leaving you completely crushed under the weight of your own arrogance. The story you just heard is a work of fiction, but the systemic architecture, the corruption, and the brutal mathematics of this world are entirely real and operating right now. A loop without end is greater than. If this descent into the shadows made you question the systems around you, drop a comment below and tell me your biggest takeaway. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our next deep dive into the abyss. See you in the next one.